Thank you, Chairman Leach and Vice Chair Johnson, members of the committee. I'm here to testify in support of House Bill 148. My name is Kay Van Way, and for more than 30 years, I've represented various citizens of the state of Texas who were minding their own business, and out of the blue, catastrophe struck their family due to a preventable medical error. Notably, in recent years, I represented more than a dozen patients of the now infamous Dr. Death and assisted the prosecution in landing him in prison for the remainder of his life. Since then, I've been involved, in addition to my law practice, in advocating for patient safety so that we can identify the root cause of the medical errors that happen over and over again and try to eradicate them. My clients are conservative and liberal. They're Democrat and Republican. They're rich and poor. Most are well educated. What most of them have in common is prior to undergoing a surgical procedure, they did their homework. They did their best to search the internet and find out what they could. But the truth is, in this day and age, they were likely to find out more about their purchase of a dishwasher or a used car than they could a planned surgical procedure. Likely, you've been there yourself. It's what I like to call naked and afraid. You're required to have a surgical procedure. You're identified not by the car you drive or your station in life, but rather by that wristband on your arm. You're prepared to be wheeled back to surgery, and yet there's just one more minor administrative matter that needs to be handled. That's the nurse with the dreaded clipboard, which contains a long, confusing, legalistic, canned document, which every patient has to sign before having the surgery. The information is confusing and devoid of any actual helpful information to help Texas patients understand the real pertinent risks before they decide to consent to the procedure. But have you ever wondered who writes those documents anyway? Well, in Texas, the persons that write those documents are the members of the Texas Medical Disclosure Panel, which is comprised of 6 physicians and 3 lawyers. All of the lawyers represent hospitals and healthcare institutions. So the standard is supposed to be what would a reasonable patient, like you and me and everyone in this room, would consider ourselves to be reasonable patients. What would a reasonable patient want to know? But instead, the Texas Medical Disclosure Panel is comprised of people who want you to know what they, the doctors and the healthcare provider, want you to know. I stand in strong support of this bill because I think it will improve patient safety in Texas. After all, we are all patients. We all should have the right to know and fully understand what we're consenting to and to have a voice. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa McGiffert, and I'm the board chair of the Patient Safety Action Network, a national coalition of advocates working from the patient perspective to end medical harm. The Texas Medical Disclosure Panel is responsible for developing informed consent notices, which doctors use to educate patients about the risks and procedures or treatments that they are recommending. And as said before, probably all of you have been in that place to receive that information. And the information varies. Some people get it right before the procedures. Others have a thoughtful conversation with their doctor and are able to think about it days and weeks before their procedure. Informed consent is a well-established ethical and legal obligation for healthcare providers and is critical for patient safety, patient autonomy, and decision-making. Yet many patients' recollection of understanding the medical procedure's risk is often low after receiving this information. Patient safety experts believe safe delivery of care is dependent on patient engagement, concise communication from doctors in a language that's understandable to the average patient. We believe that adding public members would assist this panel in identifying what and how to communicate risks to patients They bring the voice of the reasonable patient into the discussion. This will help. The patient advocate will help to get the panel to deal with the seriousness and probability of specific harms from the patient perspective, not this long laundry list that looks like everything is the same as far as risk. Patient advocate would insist on outside expertise when that does not exist on the panel. And the patient advocate will ground the panel in thinking of how a reasonable patient might receive the information that they're getting. I urge you to support House Bill 148. Oh, one more thing I wanted to mention is the Texas Sunset Commission has an across-the-board recommendation that all panels and committees include public members. And that includes panels like this one that come under a larger agency.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McGiffert. Members, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Vice Chair Johnson, for this important patient safety bill. When we're talking about informed consent, these are life-altering decisions that we're making. It can be a matter of life and death for the patient. A very quick history lesson. I know that we have a very full agenda today, Mr. Chairman. Informed consent goes back to the Nuremberg Code. That's how important this is. There are barriers for patients to comprehension. One is lack of knowledge, but on the other side of the scale, you can have too much information. You can have analysis paralysis, finding the right balance, finding the right wording to where that patient can understand the risks of that procedure is so important. This panel, the Texas Medical Disclosure Panel, is public facing in the truest sense of the word. Their work is about informing the public, but for no good reason, there are no members of the public on this panel. I would point you to the Texas Medical Board. Out of their 19 members, fully 7 of them are public. More than a third of the members of the Texas Medical Board are public. That is good. But we have no members of the public here with the Medical Disclosure Panel. This is about patient autonomy. It's really important for the panel to not just hear from patients, but also their advocates, people who are working with patients often. We feel that this bill will only strengthen the Medical Disclosure Panel and their important work. It will give patients a seat at the table. Doctors will still have the predominant voice, but they will be able to hear the patient's perspective. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ware. Members, any questions?
I just have a quick question.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Vice Chair Johnson.
Kay, can you just tell the committee briefly the consequences of informed consent on a medical negligence case and what impact that has when you sign away everything and something, a medical error does occur, what the consequences are?
Well, when consent forms contain a laundry list of things such as infection, bleeding, heart attack, stroke, death, the forms have become packed with the kitchen sink. Yeah. And so a patient undergoing a bunionectomy consents to bleeding, and a patient undergoing the clipping of an aneurysm consents to bleeding. But there's no way to really quantify what that real risk is. However, if that risk is disclosed to the patient, it creates a legal presumption that the physician was not negligent. I hope I answered your question.
So that what that does, it creates a legal presumption that the patients have to overcome in the event that they have a medical negligence case, based on this gigantic list that they had very little time to maybe review.
Yes, it's my belief that the Texas Medical Disclosure Panel has interest in putting the kitchen sink on consent forms because they get the benefit of a legal presumption.
Thank you.
That's a great bill. Okay. Members, any other questions? All right. Thank you each for being here.